imagining new worlds, people getting a little bit obnoxious sometimes and agitating for change. All of that starts with curiosity. We're professional empathy educators, and we teach empathy as a mindset, a decision, a skill set you can move through, and not necessarily tied to emotions. So all of that being said, what our particular passion in this planet is to help people understand themselves and others better. And this series is in service of that. It's called Welcome to My World. And I get the incredible privilege to talk to people from all over the world who are different than me, which is literally every person, about something in their lives that if we knew about it, we would understand the world better. And today's guest is absolutely no exception. I get to talk to Kyle Derosiers, who is a fellow Baylor alum, which we will talk about, and is currently living in Tel Aviv, which is a place I have never lived or been to. So we have some commonalities and some differences. He's working on a thesis about COVID-19 and threat perceptions with religious interfaith and intergroup relationships. And we're going to talk a little bit about why he thinks that's important. And kind of going from there. While he was at Baylor, he was a big advocate for interfaith work and queer work on campus, which for anyone who knows anything about Christian colleges, that is not for the faint of heart. So we may or may not get into that, but I'm very excited to welcome Kyle. Kyle, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you, Kristen, for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this. So let's jump right in. Why do you think there's an interfaith component to COVID, especially in Israel?
Yeah, so I think like the religious leaders that we see in the world, such as the Pope, such as the Dalai Lama, have given, statements and have written things. I know that the Pope has published things about it, about how this is a time in which we're in this crucible, and it's a time in which we can examine things through tragedy and through hardship, but can examine how to do things differently. And it's a time when maybe people who weren't paying attention, can pay a little bit more attention. I'm not always so hopeful about that, but it seems to me that this is a great time to think about religious values, just like in the US, how you have people who unfortunately wrap up conspiracy theories with religion and resist government policies because of their religious values. You find that here in Israel and in Palestine, and it seems that it's a great time to think of how does COVID affect empathy, and how does both people feeling threatened by their neighbors who might make them sick, and also people feeling threatened by their freedom, like their religious freedom. And while I firmly believe that these restrictions, that these policies are to keep people safe, there is something to mourn and something that is lost when people are told, they cannot hold weddings or bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs, gatherings, that they can't have religious services. And so I know that people grieve, and that's why people are angry. So it's like a threat on different ways, different levels of threat, and different status quos that are affected. So it's a big deal, and it really, I think, affects a lot about religion.
That's such a great point. And we talked a lot about like the grieving of missing weddings and things like that. But it's very important to remember that a lot of religious events are rites of passage. Like you mentioned, bat and bar mitzvahs. Like I can't fathom my Jewish friends not having. And it just occurred to me that there's now an entire generation who didn't get it on time.
Yeah. And weddings, where you would traditionally have a lot of people, like you can't.
Yeah. So I'm curious, as you've now been on the ground in Tel Aviv for a little while, I think you've been living there for a little bit. What's the COVID-19 temperature there? Like, do you see a lot of similarities to the States? Is it really different? Kind of what does it look like?
Yeah, so I spent the entire pandemic here. I went home to Texas, where I'm from Arlington, for the first time during these Christmas holidays. And wouldn't you know it, that the day after I got off, or 2 days after I got off the plane, I tested positive for COVID, arriving in the US. I survived this long, and I had my 3 vaccines here. But it's taken a lot more seriously in this society. especially in the big cities like Tel Aviv, which is more secular, which actually does relate to the people taking it more seriously, which is interesting. And they had some very strong lockdowns on gathering and commerce, and for months, and for different waves that came through. There was a very progressive vaccine campaign, and it was kind of at the beginning of the world in terms of access. There was a free vaccine program. Here it's socialized healthcare, which I've really come to appreciate, which of course has flaws you can talk about all day, but
yeah, I lived under the NHS for years. I both love it and loathe it simultaneously. Right. So yeah.
Right. But then I came to the US and I was shocked, because here you cannot go into a grocery store without a mask, and you can't ride public transport without a mask. And like in the US, it seems so optional. And it was really a culture shock, just like that, and I know it's not worth, screaming at someone, but like, to me, it represents a lack of consideration for other people. And it's very odd that you go into the Kroger and you just don't see people wearing masks. It really is surprising, even when Omicron started to increase, and I don't know, like here, well, I'm Catholic, and it was not possible to attend masses for a very long time, or any kind of religious service, and so it was like, it was no choice, and that's something to mourn. And also, like, it kept people from getting sick, and cases were pretty low. So there's a whole lot of there. I think I would say that the Israeli Ministry of Health handled a lot better than the US. And it's a small country, a small population.
It's very, like my Danish relatives and things like that. I'm always like, right, but your country is the size of one of our cities. And so it's not apples and oranges, but it's always really great to hear the lived experience. So, and I'm really fascinated by this idea of the element of interfaith within, and I know you worked with the Interfaith Youth Corps and that work at Baylor, especially because you are like a walking interfaith experiment, evidently, now that you just let us know that you're Catholic, you went to a Baptist university, now you're living in a predominantly Jewish country. So kind of, I think, would you mind unpacking why you see interfaith work as so important?
Because I think everyone has a relationship to faith or spirituality, even if they resist it, and a lot of queer people like me, and a lot of people for a lot of reasons, because, they find that there's just no way, they think, to reconcile, their queer identity or their identity as a feminist, or their worldview with their faith. And so many people, leave it behind. And there's a whole lot of reasons, but the point is, everyone has a relationship with religion, and while it still has a lot of pull, a lot of power, a lot of influence here, where there's always been this tug of war. Obviously, you have ethnic and religious conflict here, but also, like, within, like, Jewish Israeli society, you also have people who with a million different definitions. And like, as much as people say they're secular, they I mean, many people aren't. Everyone has different ways in which their religious values are very integral to how they see the world. And it's like one approach. For me, I don't really like politics or law. I think I would much rather look at these things through like religious and cultural lenses. But obviously, they're all very, very important in terms of how do you pursue justice and how do you pursue peacemaking.
Yeah, I mean, I'm part of this incredible organization that you may or may not have heard of called the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty.
Yeah, I know. I've met some of them. They came to our conference at Baylor.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I'm a BJC fellow, and cool. It's definitely something that I would, if you come back to the US, you should consider doing. But it gave me such an appreciation for, like, the fact, like you, I don't want to be a lawmaker. I don't want to be in the stuff of it, but being a human who sees the world through these lenses, if I don't know what's going on with the laws, I'm also, I've kind of like cut off a limb. But if we don't have a holistic view, it's it's really difficult. And I think I love what you said about that everybody has some sort of relationship with it, even if it's a negative or broken or toxic relationship. Even if you are somebody who identifies as an atheist, my guess is that you have some really strong opinions on religion. So everybody has a relationship with it. And I think that's really great. And especially at the intersection of religion and sexuality.
Of course.
Yeah. So as we're kind of thinking so we're doing a lot of thinking at Abbey Research about what's next, kind of where do we go from here? Because at some point COVID will become endemic and it will be less the daily conversation. It will still be resonating. Kind of where do you see your work entering that new possible world?
You mean the research project that I'm currently doing?
Or your advocacy work? You are a multidimensional fellow, Kyle. So pick a lane.
Okay. Yeah. So to live in a world with, and of course there were already other illnesses which are, I guess, classified as pandemic. I don't know a whole lot about how you classify them, but like AIDS is pandemic. HIV is pandemic, and HIV, the pandemic. No, it's called pandemic, right? Not epidemic.
Yeah, it's still a pandemic because it's in every country. It's just it's one that we don't talk about anymore. I'm so glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I actually wrote my undergraduate thesis at Baylor. I interviewed some people who were long-term HIV survivors about their spiritual journeys.
Wow.
And anyways, it kind of motivated what I'm doing now, because these things hopefully shook up religious leaders, shook up people in the kinds of things they're preaching, and people who are marching and advocating, and like religious sisters who are taking care of the sick, and you can go back and it's really interesting. You can look at like what were the leaders, the Catholic bishops, the Protestant leaders, the Latter-day Saints leaders. They all had so much that they were saying in the US, and a lot of it was extremely hostile and violent and hateful, and a lot of it was motivated by empathy and by compassion. So it's like kind of this, it's not the same with COVID, of course, you just can't compare, but it is illness that we're confronted with, and it's culture war that we're confronted with, and it's just another thing that we have to live with, and so I think it really makes a lot of sense to think about it, how it relates to religion.
Yeah, I mean, the AIDS pandemic is so morally colored, for better or for worse. It's very morally colored. And I think people's reaction to COVID is morally colored, but not the disease itself. But I'm glad you brought up AIDS, because it is a thing that people had to figure out how to grapple with almost overnight. And that's similar to COVID. And we're still not sure of what's going to go on. And I was thinking about, as you were talking, that we have a really shallow understanding of disease and kind of as people, and we keep thinking like that the prevention mechanisms are like impenetrable armor. And they're not. They're just prevention mechanisms.
Right.
And AIDS, the prevention mechanisms are stronger, but they're not perfect.
No.
Because human bodies are so weird. And I love that we're talking about the incorporeal idea of faith. So I guess one of my other questions, and I ask this to everybody who's in your generational age bracket, but what's your hope for how, I guess in a way, what's the thing that you wish you could change the fastest? Is it that we could all talk about religion easier, or is it something else?
Oh, wow. You mean like in the whole world?
Pick a thing. Like if you could gather everybody, and they had to listen to you for 30 seconds, what do you think you would say?
Wow. First of all, I think you'd have to be like an optimistic person to do that and to think, you're gonna change this one thing. I don't know. I'm not always so optimistic.
That's totally fair.
No, but I actually, as much as I'm passionate about interreligious dialogue, and I love the scriptures, the history, all that stuff, but I would have to say it's the environment, because
fair.
We gotta sustain life, and with each passing year, it's going to become harder and harder to care for all life. And so if there was something I could say, like, we have to do something beyond just recycling, the whole, I don't know what I would say in 30 seconds, but the industries and the countries and all these institutions, there's something I would want to say to them about, being custodians of this environment. And if we don't have that, we don't have anything, And so I really think it's the most important issue. And of course, it has a lot to do with poverty, and all other kinds of social injustices, also conflict. There's so much in what I'm studying where they're talking about conflict in the environment, and it's just going to get worse, And
it's fascinating though, because you say you don't know what you would say in 30 seconds, but in a way you said it, like, we have to sustain life. And that is a deeply religious sentiment as well, across all of the major faiths. And so these, we can all kind of, I have lots of theories as to why evangelical Christians react the way they do to the environment and things like that. But it's one of those things where sometimes I sit back and I go, man, this is so deeply, like, we should want to do this theologically. Yeah, across all the major faiths. And just, everybody, all the statistics and all the research shows us that more and more people kind of under the age of 40, that when you ask them that question, they'll kind of break from their own personal soapbox and be like, right, but we have to save the planet. So you're not alone. There's a lot of us that would answer that way.
Yeah.
It's like, all of this is great, but if we turn into Wall-E, it makes it all a little bit difficult.
That's right.
So, well, Kyle, I want to be respectful of your time and your work, which I know what it's like to write a master's thesis away from home. It is emotionally a lot. So I want to release you back to your time. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience before we say goodbye?
I guess for me, as a student and as someone who's trying to work on my career as a journalist, for me, I find that empathy, which you guys are working on, is so closely linked to education. And I really want to continue to try to always be like a journalist. And if I do, God forbid, continue with academia, I want to be someone who tries to integrate compassion in what I'm studying, what I'm researching, and try to not see the world just from my subjective perspective, because I'm afraid that just colors so much, even in academic research. And I think empathy is so crucial to that. Like, how do you be an academic with empathy, whether you're working with human being subjects, or whether you're talking about something like the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, and how do you do it where acknowledging the suffering, acknowledging the inequality, acknowledging the violence, and acknowledging the multiplicity of narratives, that there just truthfully are not black and white ways to diagnose or to solve it. And empathy is integral to that. So I guess that's my rambling. I don't know what else I could end with.
No, that's all perfect. I obviously completely agree. And I'm really glad that you brought in that perspective. Kyle, thanks so much again for joining me. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I'm really glad to hear your perspective on the world. And thanks for sharing your time and your brain with us for a little bit. Friends and neighbors, if you're watching this and you are new to us because you are friends with Kyle, welcome to the Work of Abby Research. We would love it if you would give the video a thumbs up, because the algorithm loves it, and therefore we need to as well. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed this conversation. I have lots like it, and I think you'll enjoy the rest of our content. In the meantime, comment below, engage with the work, tell us what you think. If you've got ideas, I will make sure that Kyle sees any questions that you have, and we'll kind of go from there. So again, my name is Dr. Kristen Donnelly. My guest has been Kyle Derosiers, and this has been Welcome to My World. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.